Hello and welcome to this week's Back Chat from the Arc at Headingley, and a very warm welcome to three very special people as well today. But that's enough about you watching at home. Let's introduce the panel today. We've got Chris Irvine from the Times newspaper, Gary Heatherington, former hooker and second row forward for Kent Invicta, wonder what he's up to these days, we'll find out a little later, and Phil Caplan from 4020 magazine. Let's start, loads to talk about as ever, but let's start on an international theme. Chris, first of all, Denver. Is it going to happen or is it not going to happen? Do the NRL clubs, are they going to block this? Are the English players going to rise up in unity and make sure it happens? I mean, it's an absolute farce that we don't know yet. Well,
it's quite obvious that the Aussies don't think they can breathe at that altitude, because it's going to be far too high for the Mile High Stadium. Look, it is a farce. And it's a farce at the expense of the international competition, the international game. And this is a brave... This is part of this brave new world working towards a World Cup in North America in 2025. Jason Moore, the promoter, got this game, and this is the kind of start of it, building up towards this World Cup in 2025. And here we are. Is the Test match even going to take place? Or is it going to take place with NRL-based players? The England guys, they seem to be on board, but what is the position of the NRL clubs? And their position seems to be we don't want them to go.
Gary, just to play devil's advocate here, you can see the NRL club's point of view, can't you? Because they've got a very successful product. They don't need a game in Denver to improve their income from a TV deal, which is already worth multi-millions. And why should they risk their players in promoting something that ain't going to have a direct effect on them?
Well, it may not have a direct effect today, but what about next week and next year and the future? I think there's a recognition that Rugby League does need to expand. There's no real opportunity here. We've got a terrific promoter who's going to take all the risk and take the game to North America. There's already quite a bit of interest in Rugby League in North America. This is an ideal vehicle to actually further develop it. And I think we just need to be mindful that it's not all the Rugby League clubs in Australia that's against it. It's a certain number of individuals,
right,
and they're making a lot of noise and bringing this to the attention of a lot of people. The uncertainty of it all. But the game has actually been scheduled by the International Board to go ahead. So it will go ahead, I've no doubt whatsoever about that. But it's just affecting the publicity and the promotion of it by the what I would call mischievous comments of just some in Australia who appear to have their own agenda and their own vested interest. But no, I think you know, the recent World Cup did a tremendous amount, certainly in Australia, who've always been reticent about the development of international rugby league. I think their attitude is changing. Certainly that's the opinion I've formed whilst I was over there, and the World Cup did so much to actually change opinion.
Because we're jumping to the conclusion that the NRL are against it. There's not been an official statement from the NRL as such, has there?
Well, this is another case of the game washing its dirty linen in public that perhaps it doesn't need to. You know, overreacted perhaps to things that haven't been said yet. The NRL have brought out their new strategic plan from 2018 to 22, and included in that is an element of expansion that includes the international game. They mention the World Cup and the effect it's had, the fact that Tonga have extended the interest of people outside of the top three nations. I'm not even sure that we're not making too much of a big deal about this. It's England against New Zealand. There will be an England team, there will be a New Zealand team, and even if that New Zealand team is part picked from Super League, then the fact is that the American audience will not know the difference. They'll see a competitive game of rugby league, something that they've never seen before. And I get Jason Moore's contention that if it's not the top players, why should he put money into it? But what we know is that we've got a sport that will captivate under this no pads, no blocking, 6 downs promotion that he's put out there. And actually, if it's Thomas Luluai playing instead of Isaac Luke, it's not going to make any difference to the watching public.
The key is to get the whole of rugby league engaged in supporting international rugby league. I think we've led the way. I think the Super League clubs in England and the RFL have actually led the way. I think Wayne Bennett is promoting it. The England players are promoting it. From what I understand, those players who will be representing New Zealand, likely to be,
Sean Johnson's come out and said he wants to be part of it.
And of course, but that's not necessarily great news. That's not going to capture the attention. The fact that, but what captures the attention is people's opinions, and you know, they get a medical officer to talk about the welfare issue, which is always going to be a sensitive one. But you compare that to backing up after state of origin games and etc., playing in Papua New Guinea, playing in Queensland in extreme heat. And of course it's a nonsensical argument really.
I'd like to be the St George chief executive that tries to stop James Graham playing for England.
Yeah, I mean, fair enough. But you're going to have New Zealand players there, and even if the NRL, Chris, even if the NRL don't come up with an official line, an official statement, you are going to have words behind scenes at clubs that might just put off certain players turning out for New Zealand, for example.
Yeah, I think so. But tampering is the kind of theme in Australia this week, and we've had it in cricket, and the tampering with international rugby league and the future of the game. What amazes me is that they saw the high point of the World Cup and a World Cup final, so they see it on their doorstep, but didn't sell. I don't think they sold it particularly very well at home.
No. They weren't interested. They literally weren't interested.
And that's the problem. That's the problem, isn't it? Is that the club game and state of origin, that's seen as the pinnacle. International rugby league is not seen as the pinnacle. For England players, Jamie Peacock says this and articulates this very well. For the likes of him and many players, playing for England or Great Britain is the pinnacle of the game. And I'm not sure. I think Cameron Smith and the Billy Slaters get it, but I don't think certain people, referred to by Gary, in the game in Australia get it. They think that they put more of a priority on other things within their own nation. They are not outward looking. They're very insular and inward looking.
I think in fairness to them, I think Mal Meninga's doing a good job in that regard, and has put
and Mel's got the form on the board.
Likewise during his term, and I think the public are actually, I think the people often get forgotten about this is the public. I'm certain that the fans would actually want to see a game.
Well, they want to see international rugby league, weren't they, for the World Cup? They couldn't actually get them into the stadium, but people were watching.
Absolutely.
It.
Yeah. Well, that's Australian rugby league all over. They can't get them into the stadiums, but people are watching on television.
Isn't that part of that because we haven't beaten them in a series since 1970? We need to give them something back in terms of an international cut through that says this is worthy of you taking it seriously, and Origin is a bigger product at the moment, whether we like it or not. And the other thing as well is that we need to be careful from our end as well that through nobody's fault but the weather, we are now scheduling games, club games, on that international weekend because we have to. Now it may well be that Wayne Bennett won't pick his absolute strongest team because he has to make a concession to the fact that there'll be some club games going on. But it will be a bona fide international event.
And I don't think there'll be that level of sort of manipulation in the team. I think it'll be the best England team. I think a few years ago the England team came from just a few clubs. St Helens produced a lot of 6 or 7, and Wigan and Leeds and so on. It's actually now, if you look at the spread of the England team, there's only 17 players going to play. Probably 6 or 7 of those are going to come from the NRL. So there's only likely to be 9 or 10 from the Super League, and that'll be across several teams, I would imagine.
One thing that blocks international development, for my mind, is Origin. The Aussies are so obsessed with Origin for all the right reasons, but it is only 2 states playing against each other and has no international impact whatsoever, does it really? Whereas if we can get something happening in North America, and it does have an impact bigger than Origin, that's the breakthrough, isn't it?
Yeah, the thing about Origin, I think that's for them, it's filled in that gap with the internationals. Phil referred to it, we've not beaten them for 46 years. Origin wasn't even started in that time. It's a relatively new concept that's been going and very successfully. It's a great successful vehicle, and people want to watch it. But in
terms of spreading the word of rugby league, it doesn't spread the word.
It doesn't even spread the word to Victoria. No. I mean, they're going to take it to Adelaide this time, and they try to put it around.
There's only 90,000 people watching it. It's in Melbourne this year.
But it's an echo chamber. It's an echo chamber of these people know about rugby league.
It has cut through in America. I mean,
has it really?
I think if you look at social media when those games are on, it's worldwide. I think it's part of a strategy to sell the sport of rugby. It's a little bit like the Leeds-Castleford rivalry that we saw this weekend. That the North Queensland-Brisbane rivalry, it goes beyond if you support those teams. If it's a really good event that happens on a regular basis,
it's meant to be a test trial, actually, isn't it? It's meant to be a test trial. The best team will get picked for Australia.
Do you think we'd have had this argument if England had won the World Cup final?
No, I think the international game would have been elevated up the rankings.
Yeah, exactly.
And people would have seen the potential. I think the key ground.
I disagree with that. I think it's still the clubs hold reign on this. It's the clubs that, if there's a problem, it's the clubs that are causing the problem.
I think there is a key market to be developed in America. Now, how we do that should be a game-wide strategy, not the NRLs, not necessarily the RFLs, not possibly Super Leagues, not the international federations. We all need to come together and say, how do we crack that?
The Australians are talking it from on such a strong point. They've got a massive TV deal. The game is popular. It's the main game in two states, and it isn't here. The game here is waning, and that's part of the problem, isn't it?
Yeah.
We're part of the problem.
So what's the role then of the Rugby League International Federation? I mean, Gary, I'll put this to you. I mean, you mix in these circles. The RLIF to us just seems an absolute toothless body. You know, it might come up with big ideas, but actually forcing those ideas through, it can't do it.
To be fair to it, I think it's made a lot of progress, certainly in the last 5 years, culminating in the World Cup, and then, you know, I think actually getting a buy-in about International Rugby League. And, you know, it's interesting, Phil, to talk about the NRL strategic plan, which is a heavy focus on International Rugby League. So I think that is real progress, and I think the work that John Grant, Nigel Wood did and is continuing to do it is actually really productive. So I actually think there's a lot more positives. It's just that typically rugby league, actually the good news doesn't actually get out, and we find ourselves talking about the opinion of just a few individuals maybe in Australia who are actually capturing the headlines, supported by a very sympathetic media.
I think the problem for the RLIF is it doesn't really have any access to real proper funding to give it teeth. The only income it generates is through World Cups. The profit that is made, which isn't this year for 2017 going to be as much as they'd projected, is all they can spend. It funds things like the European Federation developments of countries. But if you haven't got as much money as the people you're trying to rail against, then your argument doesn't hold sway, and that's the problem. How do we get the NRL or the ARL and Super League stroke RFL to put more money into the international game so it has more to? We haven't even got
it has to generate it, Phil, doesn't it? The international game has to generate its own income, and we as the Super League, the NRL, have to actually support that to enable it to generate more money.
For example, they've announced a World Cup Nines for 2019, which could generate new income. It's a new product. There's no television deal yet attached to it, but we have no details of it. We don't know when it's going to be, where it's going to be, how you're going to qualify for it.
An Alliance Tour, I mean, as simple as a Lions Tour. We know there's going to be a Lions Tour next year. We don't know where, who we're going to be playing, etc. Which is a big issue, because I mean, at the World Cup there were a lot of fans there. I mean, we were in a bar in Perth that was packed with English fans, wasn't it? And we were both drinking Coca-Cola at the time, but absolutely packed, and people who'd saved up for years, because this is a trip of a lifetime. We've got a Lions Tour next year. People are going to be denied access to that because they've not had time to save up, because they don't know what the itinerary is.
Exactly, and we've seen it in the years touring. You know, 6, 8, 10,000 plus people will travel from this country, but if they don't know if the things aren't where they're going and things aren't organised, then you're completely hampered. But this is the problem. Rugby League's quite good at tossing out, there's going to be a World Nines in 2019, there's going to be this, that and the other, but where's the backup, where's the support? It's quite unusual actually to get the 3 test matches early dates and venues for the 3 match series against New Zealand in the autumn. That was quite good. I thought that was quite good progress at the back of the World Cup. But it's always with the World Cup 2 steps forward and 3 back. I mean, it's great that Tonga and Fiji once again get to the semi-finals. There's so many good news stories and positive things. England get to the final and a good final, and then it just seems to be, we retreat from that all the time. And to me, International Rugby League is the vehicle to spread the sport, and we have a wonderful opportunity in Denver to do exactly that, and it's compromised.
But isn't Denver part of a wider strategy about 2025? Isn't that what we should be looking at? The World Cup, although not yet officially ratified, which again is one of the problems with does the RLIF have enough teeth, is supposedly going to America. All the governing bodies, international and domestic, should be looking at ways they can enhance that offering in 2025 by using this 7-year lead-in to introduce it to the American market. The NRL are saying that they may start a round 1 game in 2019 and 2020 in America. So they're talking about already Parramatta and Souths playing in Los Angeles in 2019. Well, if that's going to happen, surely that's got to tie into Denver rather than be in opposition.
Well, can I just throw one here at you as well? I mean, Salford wanted to play Catalan Good Friday in New York, and it was blocked by the clubs, and Salford say, yeah, fair enough, because competitive advantage if they only play 1 game over Easter. I've heard a hint that it could be Leeds, Salford against Leeds this year in New York. Is that a possibility? Is that viable?
Well, we were supportive of that concept, because I think, you know, in any there's clearly interest. There's a franchise bid coming in from New York, we understand, So if that's the case, and if there's genuine interest in New York, then it does make sense to me to actually take a game there and showcase it, test the market. It's actually what happened with the Caplan Dragons. I remember Leeds Rhinos played London Broncos. They took their game against Leeds Rhinos to Perpignan as a test of the market to see just before Perpignan Caplan Dragons entry, to be good to do the same thing. And so we're supportive of that concept. If Salford are prepared to take one of their games and it happens to be against us, yeah, we'd be receptive to that, as indeed I'm sure other Super League clubs may be as well.
Yeah.
So I think that concept and that idea is a solid.
But it's reinforcing your point earlier, Gary, that the British game is responsive to this, and it's making all the headway. But where the power lies is in Sydney and Brisbane. And they're the ones who are they're the ones who are quite happy in their, it's not a little country, it's a big country, but they're just happy to just sit down there, play a NRL and play State of Origin and internationals when it suits them, really. And that's the problem. If they can get on board, if we could really get the Aussies on board, how powerful would this game be?
Well, I'm going to have to stop that. We're going to have to stop that. We run out of time at the end of part one, but Australia doesn't care about the world, but the problem is the world doesn't care about Australia. So hopefully we can solve that problem. We're back solving even more problems in part two of Back Chat after this break. Hello and welcome back to Back Chat, part two at the Arc in Headingley, and we've got a real Leeds flavour to the day as well. Chris Irvine from The Times, Phil Caplan from 4020, and Gary Heatherington, the Leeds Rhinos Chief Executive, is with us as well. We're talking about Denver. I mean, the international game dominated the first part, but what about the domestic game? Because it's not exactly a bed of roses, is it, at the moment? Gary, you had a pop at some of us journalists the other week. I won't say what you said because it was quite rude, but you were saying that we weren't investigating the issues properly in terms of what's going on behind the scenes. What is going on behind the scenes with the Super League at the moment?
Well, I will find out for getting asked inane questions about what's going to be the structure of the competition next year and this, that and the other, because we've heard from a certain chief executive or chair, and my problem, and hence the retort, was that people don't know the facts. And of course the facts are that 3 years ago, all the Super League clubs and all the Championship clubs and all the Division 1 clubs signed into effectively a 7-year agreement, and that was endorsed by the RFL, and that was the agreement that was actually taken to Sky and sold to Sky for 7 years. And so 3 years in, to be saying that that's not going to change unless all those parties come together and agree to a change. And then the RFL agreed to that change, and ultimately Sky agreed to that change, so all parties to it. That's unlikely to happen. That's very unlikely to happen. So nothing's going to change unless everybody actually wants it to change. And so
there's clearly a mood for change amongst certain Super League clubs, because there's a letter gone round, which I think most of us have seen, about a shift in the balance of power to the Super League clubs, that they run the game much more than they do at the moment, that there's funding withdrawn from certain clubs at the bottom end of the pyramid.
Yeah, well, it's fair to say there is an appetite amongst quite a number of clubs in Super League that the governance of the game needs to change. I'm at odds with that, because I believe that the governance structure in our game is very, very solid. If we turn the clock back sort of 25 years, when the game was in turmoil and Wigan were dominating the domestic scene, and clubs like Widnes and Hull and Leeds were all heading for bankruptcy, that the game was in real peril then. Along comes the Super League, and of course a bright new future. Move to summer, full-timeism, Super League competition, not without controversy, but a new... And we created then a separate Super League administration to run parallel with the RFL administration, two separate administrations, for good reason. However, within the next 5 years, we actually started to realise that this was creating real problems for the game. A separation with the governing body, an elitism within the sport, a disenfranchisement within the sport and such. So a lot of problems. And so what that led to is the RFL was on its way to bankruptcy itself, creating an interim board. That interim board oversaw the coming back together of a single administrative entity and significantly a independent governance, the first time in the sports history. And I believe that that model has served the game well for the last 17 years. There is a move to change that now, but that's not supported by Leeds. We believe that the governance model, independent governance, a governance that sits above the whole game, is the right model.
But it's fair to say you're in the minority.
Yes.
Amongst the Super League clubs, you and maybe 2 other clubs agree, but the others are against that. They won't change.
There is an appetite to take more control, more influence within the game, and to rest that in the hands of the clubs. I don't think that's the way forward. I think we need a single entity that's overseeing the whole game. Clearly, Super League is the dominant competition, and I believe that Super League should have its own general manager, its own face, its own voice of that competition, and so should the Championship, and actually so should the Division 1. And all those executives should be working together under the general direction of the RFL Chief Executive, working together on a whole range of issues. How can we grow? Growth is the key one. Grow our supporter base, grow our participation, grow the whole entity of the game, and one coordinated plan. It's interesting, the NRL have come out with their 4-year strategic plan. We need to do the same, and it probably needs to be longer than 4 years in truth, and it needs to cover all aspects. League competition, league structure, how many teams in Super League, how do we actually divide the wealth of the game, how do we generate more income for the game? That's the key issues, and that needs to be driven by the RFL. They are the governing body, they are the independent governing body, and it's up to them to drive it.
The problem is, Chris Irvine, I'll bring you in on this, the problem is the RFL is in a state of flux at the moment because there's no chief executive, there's a kind of a power vacuum, to use that expression. So how important is this next appointment going to be, the chief executive of the RFL, and who should it be? Someone from outside the game or someone from within the game?
We appear to be on shifting sands at the moment, and there's a lack of transparency from... Look, I agree partly with what Gary's saying. What he's alluding to, I think, is when the clubs are there and trying to run the game, it's like having a bag of snakes in charge. They really rub up the wrong way with each other. There's a lot of, they're looking after self-interest. Now, at the moment, certain parts of the Super League saying we're united and we can run the game and all the rest of it. So I think we've got a real problem here, and the RFL seems to have diminished in significance as well. So I don't know, the next chief executive of the RFL, how much charge is that person going to have? And then we hear talk about Rob Elston maybe coming in as the kind of head of the Super League clubs, who's the former director at Castleford, part of Super League, coming in '96, and that, good guy to be involved, I would say, in the game. If he could be persuaded to leave Everton, I think he'd be a good appointment. But what is that appointment for the RFL, the Super League clubs? I don't know. We have an acting chief executive in Ralph Rimmer at the moment, but everything seems to be in a state of flux. We hear very, very little from the RFL. They have a media department there who I believe are barely working in terms of getting their message out. We don't know what the message is.
I mean, the RFL at the moment, the chief executive's gone, the Super League executive has gone, Roger Draper. One of their key staff members within the media department has gone, career advancement in his case. So there feels as though there's nothing coming out of
there's nothing coming out of there. And within this vacuum, certain Super League chairmen are, seem to have a voice, but we don't know what their vision is, and that's led to this kind of speculation of, do they want it to be 14 teams or 10 teams or whatever? But we are locked into, at the moment, a Sky deal for 7 years. That's not to say that if all parties agree that, and you can extend the contract, I think that's very important, that we can get an extension of a television contract beyond 2021. Because at the moment, I think the professional game cannot see beyond there at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, the scary thing about the scary thing about the TV contract is there seems to be an assumption in some areas that we're going to roll that on in terms of finances. I don't think we are. No. It's going to be a diminishing pot.
And the media landscape is changing today, never mind in 4 years' time when this is due for renewal. I think the issue is partly about our identity. And it comes along every so often, and this may be the last time since perhaps 1973-74 when we actually looked at the game and went, what are we actually trying to be? You know, what are our key performance indicators that we measure ourselves by? And we seem to have now a split sport, that we have the full-time professional sport and the part-time sport, and most of the traditional part-time clubs are linked into communities built on industries and schools and pubs and clubs that don't exist anymore. So how do they survive and have something meaningful to play for? And how does perhaps the top end of the game then move on and bring in what is the key to all of this, more finance?
Yes.
You can't do anything without money. When the football broke away to form the Premiership, the top clubs were united and went and got a significant amount of finance that then didn't trickle down as much, but there was an effect for the clubs at the bottom. They saw some benefit from it. We don't have that at the moment. We are two bald men fighting over
the current system, the current way that the money is divided, is that not protecting clubs who are not actually bringing anything to the game? There must be clubs, you must be aware of clubs who you're thinking are getting this handout and aren't bringing anything else into the game.
Absolutely, yeah. So I'm not for just doling money out. I think we've a responsibility to protect all professional clubs, but only to the extent of helping those who's trying to help themselves. So if a club is shown to be failing in minimum standards, and whether that's been Super League, Championship or Division 1, then all funding should be conditional. It should be conditional on actually meeting certain objectives and certain minimum standards. So I think there is an opportunity to actually look again at the funding model that's within the sport. But I would also say we are guilty also of painting a really, really dark picture when actually there's a lot of good things happening as well. You know, this league structure we have has created the most competitive championship that we've ever had.
Has it?
I believe it has, yeah.
But even this year, after only 6 or 7 games, four teams have broken away by 5 points.
And the 4 teams at the bottom are the ones you could have predicted.
But that's on the funding that they're getting as much as their ability to
all those
play.
clubs in the Championship are in a much more stable position than they might have been 4 or 5 years ago, and that's an indicator as well. And even in the Division 1, there are now shoots of clubs that's actually got there is a pathway into Super League. There's an opportunity to invest, an incentive to invest. So I think there's a lot of actually good things happening.
But if you're putting conditions on clubs outside of what they do on the field, is that not a return to franchising in some way?
Yeah, and absolutely, the better elements of franchising should be retained, and that is effectively minimum standards. Every club should be striving to improve its own entity, but also meeting minimum standards. And clearly, clubs in Super League, in Champions, are failing to actually get to what one would reasonably expect to be a minimum standard.
Are you then, you and Ian Lenagan is obviously the main protagonist on the other side in terms of the change that the Super League clubs, are you not actually arguing for the same outcome, but coming from different directions? That, I mean, the talk about the 20 clubs, is the reality not that there are only potentially 20 realistically viable clubs in rugby league?
Well, when you say realistically viable, professional, full-time, professional. I think me and Ian share the same vision in terms of we both want to see the game develop and expand and reach its potential, and we sort of want to see Super League grow as a much bigger entity. Of course we do. Where we disagree is in the way that you get there. And how you get there along the process of getting there, and ultimately what is the ownership structure and the governance when you actually get there. So I think the strength of our game of rugby league is the collectivity of it. You know, all the different parts. We've got a community game, we've got a semi-professional game, we've got a professional game, we've got an international game, we've got and it's actually growing all them different parts of the game. And within that, the clubs themselves have got an enormous responsibility. As a member of Super League, we carry an enormous responsibility, and it's up to us to grow our business, to make our facilities bigger and better, to grow our fan base. There's not enough growth going on, and so then with too many clubs who are looking for the governance to solve the problem.
So that's organic growth, and I can see that. But it seems to me that there are certain protagonists within the game who want to bypass that. They want to keep all the money. They want to grow themselves and give themselves a chance in a highly competitive market.
Isn't that every club? Isn't that every club at the moment is going to vote? Whether you're, I mean, we've said this before. Whether you're St Helens, Wigan, Leeds, Batley, Coventry, wherever you are, you're going to vote in the best interest of your club, not in the best interest of the game as a whole.
And that's the problem I referred to earlier.
And that's where we're looking for the governing body. the RFL, we talk about, you know, there's no communication. That's where we're now looking for strong leadership. This is the opportunity for Brian Barwick, has been chairman now for quite a number of years. This is an opportunity for Brian Barwick and his board of directors and Ralph Rimmer.
Have you heard from Brian, though? Have we heard from Brian?
This is their opportunity to come and articulate.
But we don't hear from them.
We've never had a spokesperson. I mean, in all of the Super League years, apart from maybe Chris Casey at the beginning, we haven't had a spokesperson for Super League, and this is part of the problem. But isn't the issue also about, going back to sort of the franchising element, who is going to decide on these new clubs that they're going to be your expansion vehicle, the potential New Yorks, Bostons, Ontario? Is it the RFL that are going to decide which division they play in? Is it Super League that say, well, we want to bring them in as part of these 20 clubs because it's going to bring untold television riches? It all seems to be fragmented at the moment.
Yeah, and any new club that comes in via the RFL. And I understand it, they're doing their own feasibility study on the clubs that's expressing an interest.
And they were the ones who came. We were at the briefing with Ralph Rimmer, and he kind of poured cold water on Toronto coming into the Super League.
Well, no, he didn't, because, well, he might have done he did there, but then a week later we did him on a different platform, and he said, no, that's not, they'll be in. They've just got to satisfy minimum standards, which highlights
the problem that we got. There's no transparency.
I tell you what would be great. What would be great as well, I mean, the number of meetings we've sat through as journalists, and you've been on the other side on occasions, when we've sat through franchises, we've sat down through the 12s, we've sat through the Heatherington plan. There's so many different. It would be great for someone to sit down and say, this is what we're going to do next year, and by the way, this is the plan for the next 10 years. This is what we want to. How
it's
we
called
want to
Framing the
Cumbria.
Future. It's about 1999. It still hasn't been instituted.
That never happened, did it? You know, I mean, Framing the Future.
Well, I think in fairness, that was all about minimum standards. And actually, one of the things that has developed over the last 10 or 12 years is facilities. You know, when we compare the facilities in Super League now to when the competition started 21 years ago, in most cases they're significantly different.
Isn't that not a reaction to your market rather than it being driven?
I think the game, to be fair to it, set those standards, and I think that forced local authority support, for example, and it forced clubs to actually try. I think
tragic events like the Bradford Fire also had an influence on that as well. That everybody then looked at the facilities that were provided.
But the problem was that I hate to go back in time. If you go back to 1996, the opportunity was presented in the form of £87 million, and 20 odd years later, you look at that and think, well, where did the £87 million go to?
Well, we've now got a 200 million. Contract, and that's a terrific TV.
It is, but the game is shrunk. Geographically, we are smaller than we were in 1996. So has that money effectively been wasted?
Yeah, we make much less impact. I mean, we're working for national desks as we do. We're aware we're making much less impact now.
Super League's impact on the media was highly significant, and Rugby League was up there. 20 odd years later, I'm afraid that is not the case.
Wasn't there a classic example of that last weekend, where we had 5 Super League games all played at the same time, one of which was the innovative one from Leeds to take a game to a football stadium and get a record summer era crowd, but we didn't get any media cut through because those games should have been played on Saturday or Sunday.
I'm going to stop you there. We're right out of time at the end of part 2. We're back for part 3 in just a moment's time, but some more fascinating chat to come as well from right here at the Ark in Headingley. So welcome back to the third and final part of Backchat for this week, and let's turn our thoughts to matters domestic on the field for once. Well, off the field to start with, we've got a busy Easter weekend to come, but it starts on a note of disappointment for Rick Stone, Huddersfield coach, who's obviously left the club this week. I'm surprised he actually got through to this season, because there was stages last year when you thought he was going to go, but he did manage to turn it around last year.
I think when he started saying, I've not yet heard whether my contract's going to be renewed at the end of the year, that you knew there was probably going to be an issue there. I thought we might get to Easter Monday, where Caplan and Huddersfield play each other, and you just thought whoever loses that possibly is in dead man's shoes, but Huddersfield have decided to make the change before this really important Easter period.
Yeah. Looking for a bounce.
Yeah, I suspect they desperately are, because I think we know from the 8 structure that if after Easter you're in that bottom 4, it's very, very hard to get out. And it's a strange club at the moment, because in 2013, which doesn't seem that long ago, we were celebrating a League Leader Shield.
They've never moved on from that, have
no,
they? They never developed
a couple of Wembleys they got to as well. They had a squad that when you looked at it you thought, yeah, if they can retain these guys then they're going to be there for a while. I think the problem which they are addressing, although it takes time, is junior development, that they haven't really got a whole core of young players coming through. And in people like the King brothers, for example, in Warrington, obviously they lost guys that they could have built a team around, and it sounds to me, again, another point in the Huddersfield era where they just need to look at what they are. We talked in part 2 about what the clubs bring to Super League. Well, I know everybody beats them with this stick, but you look at what they've achieved on the field over this period, and off the field hasn't matched it. Now, and the coach leaving doesn't necessarily solve that. But it's a shame for Rick, and again, hindsight being a wonderful thing, perhaps if there was going to be a change, it should have been before the season started. It also comes down to recruitment. Has he ever really had the team that he wanted? Because he inherited a lot of players on long-term deals, bought Jake Mamo in. You wonder now, with his contract expiring at the end of the year, whether he's going to now leave. And it's always starting again, isn't it, at Huddersfield, which is a shame.
It's a great geographical anomaly, Huddersfield, isn't it? That everybody says it's the heart of rugby league, because that's where rugby league was born. It's just a meeting point in the middle of the M62, or whatever the road was called in those days. It doesn't necessarily make it a rugby league town. And you've never felt that it's really pushed through. I mean, the football's massive there now.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the George Hotel, which has been abandoned now for several years, and it stands proudly in the centre of the town, but there's a disconnect between the heritage, it seems. I mean, they wear the badge with the 1895, but there seems to be a bit of a disconnect. Huddersfield's I've worked in Huddersfield, like you have, Dave, and it's a bit of a strange town. And the football's, you've got a massive grip, quite rightly, with the Premier League as well, and though they've got their own struggles at the time, but just can't seem to grow the crowd. They rely so much on Ken Davies' largesse, which is incredible. He's been incredible for them. You just wonder if ever he walked away from the club, what would happen to Huddersfield? There's never been a proper structure, it seems, there that's going to really develop the club and kick the game on the. Don't say, a media and marketing structure. It seems to lack, and. It's just they're a conundrum, really, Huddersfield, and I think it was an inevitable decision, but it probably should have come sooner rather than later. And now they've got this kind of tricky period. They've got Leeds at home, they've got the champions at home, and then they've got a trip to Perpignan, and they've got to get something out of that. Difficult task for Chris Thorman. Wow, what a task! 2 games in 4 days for him, just taking over. It's going to be very hard for him.
Caplan against Huddersfield Easter Monday. There's the magic of Super League this year.
It's
like,
I think there's an interesting parallel with what Gary did at Leeds at the start when he arrived. Now you hear the word rhino in rugby league, but in sport general, and it's synonymous with brand Leeds, whatever that is. And to make that transition from loiners to rhinos obviously wasn't easy, but it's been fantastically done. You go to Huddersfield and there is still a core of the fans that chant Fart Out. The Giants moniker hasn't taken hold.
The tail wagging the dog. Apologies to any Huddersfield fans who are watching and will take exception at that, but it is the case, isn't it? There is potential there. I remember 4 years ago, you had a cup tie at Huddersfield, and the BBC didn't want to take its cameras there because the stadium's generally empty. And you and Huddersfield got together and marketed that game. The stadium was full. It's one of the most watched rugby league games there's been in the last 3 or 4 years because of that atmosphere. So there's obviously a potential there for Huddersfield to fill that stadium.
I think so, and you've got a Super League presence and on the face of it, a terrific stadium, but in terms of just creating an energy within the place and a brand and all the sort of things that you're talking about, Phil, it's just not happened for them. And of course, the coach is now gone. And inevitably the coach is the one who ultimately carries the sacrifice. But unless you're close to it, you don't actually know. You don't know if that's the nub of the problem, or indeed are there other reasons why the team just cannot achieve any success. Always disappointing to see a coach get his tenure terminated at such an early stage. and it's going to be an interesting time for Huddersfield now.
Presumably one of the first tasks Chris Thorman has to do is put his arm around Jermaine McGilvery, who is their prime asset.
Danny Brough as well.
Well, Brough's just re-signed, isn't he?
Contract,
yeah.
But McGilvery, who is under contract, there's no reason to think that he wouldn't honour it, is obviously a jewel that was looked at after the World Cup and his fantastic performances. And, you know, if he were to leave, they really would be in trouble.
Okay, let's look at the bright side of life, because Easter for me is my favourite time of the year, apart from when the Challenge Cup kicks off and the Challenge Cup final and the Grand Final. It's one of my favourite times of the year, and I don't think I've looked forward to a St Helens Wigan game as much as this Good Friday's game. I mean, that is going to be something special.
They are out in front, aren't they?
Yeah.
They've got the best attack and the best defence so far.
But Wigan are shaping up this year.
Yeah. They love Easter though. They won the last 8 Easter derbies.
Yeah.
So it's all on Saints. It's going to be really fascinating to see. I think it's an acid test. But what I'm liking about Saints is just watching them play. I know Leeds beat them, and that was Leeds showed some champion qualities last night, last time at home. But Ben Barber, he's box office, isn't he, to watch play. And you see guys around them, Danny Richardson and players like that, really starting to step to the fore. Luke Thompson, you talk about him as the new James Graham. High praise indeed, you know. And, good game last year. Kyle Amor got sent off for quite a lot of controversy. I'm really looking forward to it. Yeah. Sold out. Yeah. Totally Wicked Stadium is sold out. I think it's going to be a cracking derby. I'm really looking forward to Good Friday.
Just harking back to your game as well, talking about big games. Your game at Ellen Road drew a crowd of just over 23,000. How many of those were new to rugby league? How many of those were not regularly watching rugby league?
Yeah, we don't know. We are doing as much research as we can now, you know, post-event in terms of looking at the whole operation, doing a comparative study with Newcastle Falcons as well, who did a similar thing with their game at St James's Park. So it's important that post-event that we actually glean as much information as possible. And the answer is we're not sure. I mean, we are in the heart of rugby league, so the chances are people who came to that game and got a real interest in rugby league. I don't think there were that many.
One little bit of information, if it helps, Gary, is that I live in Leeds, and a lot of friends I knew who wouldn't normally go to Headingley went to that game. A lot.
Yeah.
And I think
why? Just because it's at Ellen Road?
No, I think
it's a sense of occasion.
A sense of occasion. I think this thing about the clash got out there. I think the fact it was a grand final repeat and all the rest of it. So the publicity worked. You go through Leeds Bradford Airport, you see it everywhere. It was really, really visible, that game in Leeds, and fair play to both clubs in marketing that game. But I know a lot of people wouldn't normally go to that game, went to that game.
So you've only got 2 games. You've had your 2 games there this year. I mean, is there a temptation there to maybe take another one there? A Wigan or a Saints?
Well, the reason why we took it, to be honest, is because we've only got a capacity of 12,000 at Headingley during the redevelopment. But over the course of this season, the South Stand will get opened in its entirety, so our sort of capacity will increase. So no, we planned that. I think it's important that whenever you take games like that, you plan them well in advance. And, you know, it's not a short-term measure. So we've no plans to take any more games there this season.
Did it cost you money? I mean, does it cost you money to play there? And
well, of course, it is more expensive to play there, and you've got to hire the facility, whereas we don't have to hire our own facility. But there were twice as many people attended that game at Ellen Road that could have attended if it had been at Headingley because of our capacity. So it worked well in that regard. And, you know, I think other clubs can look at something similar, and that's what Salford are looking at with New York, for example.
They're good to fill the Red Bull Stadium.
Absolutely, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But I think that creates interest for the game, and just like we're talking about Easter, and it's great that St Helens have sold out, and it's great that they're playing as well as they are, and I think it inspires other clubs as well.
But Rugby Union took 2 games at the weekend to Premier League football clubs. I mean, Saracens Harlequins played at London Stadium, home West Ham, filled it out. Yeah. We couldn't do that for 2 internationals there, Rugby League. And St James's Park, Newcastle Falcons took their game and got 28,000 at the weekend. So, and they took advantage of the fact that was a fallow Saturday in terms of Premier League sport and got a lot of publicity on the back of it. But they showed the way, and I think the Ellen Road experiment showed the way as well.
Again, we're talking about events. We need to be part of this event culture. And it raises the hoary chestnut of should we be playing 2 games over Easter? Would we be better spreading out our Easter offer and making the Wigan Saints, for example, you know, the absolute, then followed on the following day rather than the same day by the whole derby. Then perhaps moving into, you know, the fact that Caplan and Huddersfield has now more resonance. That do we need to do more to say actually that was a success at Ellen Road? That maybe next year Castleford, building on the rivalry, if they want to market it that, could take it to Sheffield and play their home game with enough notice, which is the key. and generate 3 times more income than they would do down at the Jungle. Is there a case for saying now that player welfare issues aside, which actually are vitally important, as a sport we would be better having Super League on, say, Thursday, Friday, Saturday of Easter, and then Championship and League One games on Sunday and Monday? I'd love this weekend to go and watch Wigan and Saints, then go and watch Hull KR, then go and watch Featherstone and Toronto, then go and watch Doncaster York.
Yeah.
But you
You
can't.
know how to live, don't you?
But you can't.
The hoary chestnuts. I love that phrase. I'm going to be using that again later today. Taking that on, I mean, we had games on the road back in the early days.
Yeah, that's what Phil's
Wigan
alluded
in
to.
Edinburgh, and where did you go? Did you go Northampton, was it?
Gateshead.
St Helens went to
Leeds
Cardiff.
played Salford at Gateshead.
Had a game at Leicester Tigers.
Is there any appetite for a return for
Well, I think there were benefits out of that. There also you learnt lessons of as well, and it is. I think the key is whenever you take a game, wherever you take it, it's got to be planned well in advance. It's got to be heavily marketed and heavily promoted, and you've got to have the resource and the time and the money to be able to do that. So I think it is. I think that is part of a strategic mix, but not that many. You know, you need to create the special event out of it.
Isn't the key Bristol? I mean, we took a World Cup there in 2013, but aren't we supposed to be having a Bristol team in League One in 2019? So in the same way that Salford would take a game to New York, should we not be scheduling a Wigan St Helens game in Bristol? It's
really interesting you say that, because I sat down with 3 marketeers, young marketeers from the world of Premier League football the other week, and we did it for a different platform, and they were saying, you know, cute idea to take these matches to Perth and America, but what about the back door? You know, what about Manchester? What about Liverpool? Why are big events, Rugby League not putting big events on? Why are Rugby League not putting big events in Liverpool and Manchester?
Well, they are.
Well, I mean, the grand final, but I mean on a regular basis.
Yeah. Well, and look, it's for the clubs themselves. Salford are showing some initiative. To be fair to Wigan taking the game to Australia, you know, surprise as it was, but that showed some initiative, and Hull supported it. So you've got to give. So I think there needs to be a strategic plan, but there's got to be some real energy from the clubs themselves who actually want to develop their brand and take some advantage out. Wigan have gone to London several times, and once again,
what about the heartlands? Because we've not cracked the heartlands.
Well, I'm not so sure Liverpool is the heartland.
Well, but it's close enough.
Geographically, it's in the north, just like Sheffield is in the north. But to be honest, it's not heartland.
But we've got Anfield. We've got Anfield for that third, for the Test match.
And it was great for the.
And it was great for the Four Nations final. So I think that is being tested out. And we've had donkeys years ago a Wigan Charity Shield game.
I think it's important to take it to where you think that the game could develop. Coventry could be an interesting one as an example. You know, so if there's now a team in Coventry, if there's genuine aspirations for that Coventry team to get into Super League, then it needs to be surrounded by big events over a period of time.
March 2019 is the next football-free weekend when there'll be internationals. We should be planning now as part of a strategy where we might be putting 2 Super League games that weekend in football stadiums that would benefit the sport.
Yeah,
absolutely.
But coming back to Easter, I think you're right. I think the Castleford and Wakefield game on Thursday, that'll be a sellout as well. Absolutely. Yeah. So I think, you know,
Warrington Witness, it's everywhere you look.
It's a real, I think it's quite unique to rugby league in a certain is the Easter programme, and I look forward to it as well, David.
I mean, we mentioned the Hull derby. I mean, that for so many reasons, that's going to be absolutely fascinating as well, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Hull KR in some, they've got a lot of injury problems as well. I mean, that St Helens game took a big toll on them with losing Lawler for the season, and Danny Maguire concussion, and I think Heffernan as well got concussion. But and then Hull, they need. I mean, they had a good win against Caplan, but they've been disappointing a bit. Some disappointing results. So they go there. I think they're taking it's going to be another big crowd, great atmosphere, Hull derby. It is a shame though that they're both on the same day.
Well, but if you go and watch a Wigan Saints, you wouldn't go and watch Hull KR even if it was on a different day. Warrington Witness, just finally, briefly.
Already played this season.
Yeah. Witness got a bit of form.
Yeah,
back in Salford win.
They did, and but I think Warrington's nilling of Catalan has perhaps been the turning point of their season. We wanted to see what Steve Price's team would look like. I think he concentrated solely on defence when he arrived. To nil any team in Super League is important. I think on the back of that, they then had a really good win.
Is Charlie going to get run out at Easter? Do you think Josh Charlie's going to?
I don't know if he's fit enough yet.
Right.
We shall see. We shall see. But Tyrone Roberts and Kevin Brown have only trained together 9 times. Did you know that? Everyone you speak to at Warrington, it's almost like a mantra. They've only trained together 9 times.
Ben Murdoch-Macilla's try. That's worth paying money.
They're going to get better and better as the season goes on, and we can only promise to get better and better as our season goes on as well. But that's as far as we go today for Back Chat. Here's a quick reminder, though, of what's coming up on Premier Sports and our sister channel, Free Sports. The live action coming up on Premier Sports, Good Friday, Toronto Wolfpack against Featherstone Rovers. We've not even mentioned Toronto this week. That's live and exclusive from 5:45 with a 6 o'clock kickoff. Then on Easter Monday, it's over to the south of France where the Wolfpack will take on Toulouse. Again, live and exclusive from 1:15 p.m. and a 1:30 kickoff. And for all the information on this channel, go to www.freesports, don't forget the final s.tv. That's www.freesports.tv. But that's as far as we go for this week. Phil's going to go and roast his hoary chestnuts, but a thanks to our panel as ever, to Gary Heatherington, to Phil Caplan and to Chris Irvine. Rod Studd will be in this very chair next week. We'll see you then.